He thought no one was watching when he stopped everything to help a little boy with a broken wheelchair. But the man standing quietly in the corner? That was his undercover CEO, and what happened next changed his life forever. David Reynolds sat in his corner office, staring out at the city skyline, but his mind was miles away, in a dusty garage, among tools and grease-stained overalls. At 48, David was the CEO of Reynolds Auto Care, a company his father had founded with a simple mission: treat every customer like family. But somewhere along the way, that mission had been buried beneath profit margins, expansion plans, and corporate policies. The latest reports on his desk were clear. Customer satisfaction was plummeting, employee morale was at an all-time low, and social media complaints painted a grim picture of rude service and robotic transactions. David rubbed his temples, frustrated. No polished executive presentation could explain why his father's legacy was crumbling. "I need to see it for myself," David muttered. When his assistant knocked, David already had a plan forming. "Cancel next week's meetings. Tell the board I'm taking a personal leave." His assistant raised an eyebrow. "Sir," David offered a rare smile. "I'm going undercover." Within days, David Reynolds' CEO disappeared. In his place stood Mike Carter, a middle-aged man with worn jeans, steel-toe boots, and a fictional resume that placed him as a new hire at one of Reynolds Auto Care's small-town branches, a location that had been flagged for poor performance, but not bad enough to attract corporate attention. As David packed away his tailored suits and slipped on a mechanic's jacket, he knew this wasn't about secret cameras or a PR stunt. This was personal. He wanted to find out if anyone in his company still believed in what his father had built. If there was anyone left who understood that fixing cars wasn't just about nuts and bolts, but about helping people get back on the road in more ways than one. He had no idea that one quiet mechanic in that forgotten garage was about to change not only his company, but his life. The reflection staring back at David Reynolds in the cracked motel mirror was unrecognizable. Gone was the polished CEO with tailored suits and a Rolex. In his place stood Mike Carter, a man with shaggy hair under a worn baseball cap, a fake name stitched onto his grease-smeared coveralls, and calloused hands that hadn't seen real labor in years. David smirked at his transformation. If any of his board members saw him now, they wouldn't believe it. But this wasn't about appearances. It was about rediscovering the heart of his company. Early Monday morning, David walked through the faded doors of Reynolds Auto Care, branch number 42, located in a quiet, working-class town far from corporate headquarters. The building had seen better days: peeling paint, a flickering neon sign, and a waiting room that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. A gruff voice pulled him from his thoughts. "You the new guy?" David turned to see a broad-shouldered man with oil-streaked arms and a skeptical glare. His name tag read Rick, manager. "Yeah, Mike Carter," David replied, offering a firm handshake, careful not to slip into his usual executive demeanor. Rick didn't bother with pleasantries. "We don't babysit here. Tools are in the back. Stay out of the way, do your job, and we'll get along fine." David nodded, hiding a grin. Exactly the kind of environment the reports warned me about. As the day unfolded, David got his hands dirty, literally. He fumbled through basic tasks, drawing a few sarcastic remarks from seasoned mechanics. But he wasn't here to impress anyone with his non-existent mechanical skills. He was here to observe, to see how his employees treated customers when they thought no one was watching. By lunchtime, he'd already seen enough cold transactions and dismissive attitudes to confirm his fears. But just as he was beginning to wonder if anyone still cared, a quiet voice from the far bay caught his attention. "Hey, little man, don't worry. We'll get you rolling again." David glanced over, and that's when he saw him. A lone mechanic kneeling beside a broken wheelchair, and a boy who would change everything. The sharp scent of motor oil and burnt rubber hit David the moment he stepped into the main garage. The constant hum of power tools, clanking wrenches, and muffled rock music created a chaotic symphony that only seasoned mechanics could navigate with ease. But beneath the noise and grit, David sensed something else, a lack of soul. He scanned the room, noting the worn-out equipment and faded company posters preaching values like customer first and integrity in every repair. Ironic, considering what he'd already witnessed. Rick barked orders like a drill sergeant, while most of the crew worked mechanically, barely acknowledging customers who entered through the side door with hesitant steps. David watched as a young woman approached the counter, nervously explaining that her car had stalled on the highway. The man behind the desk, Tom, if David remembered correctly, barely looked up from his phone. "Yeah, leave the keys. We'll call you eventually," Tom muttered, chewing gum with an air of indifference. The woman's face fell, but she complied, clearly used to being dismissed. David's jaw tightened. So this is what Reynolds Auto Care had become. A place where people were treated like inconveniences instead of valued customers. The corporate slogans were nothing more than faded decorations now. As he moved through the garage, pretending to organize tools, he caught snippets of conversation, gripes about hours, complaints about pay, jokes at customers' expense. It was clear morale was low, and pride in their work was even lower. But amidst the apathy, something caught his eye in the far corner. A mechanic, not part of the grumbling crowd, was carefully repairing an old bicycle for a neighborhood kid, free of charge. No fanfare, no audience, just quiet kindness. David raised an eyebrow. Interesting. He made a mental note of the mechanic's name stitched onto his overalls. Leo? For the first time since arriving, David felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, not everyone here had forgotten what it meant to care. After his first shift ended, David stepped out into the fading light of the small town he once only knew from quarterly reports and profit margins. Now, walking its cracked sidewalks and passing shuttered storefronts, he saw a different picture, a community barely holding on. The town of Millstone had seen better days. Once thriving thanks to factories and steady blue-collar work, now it wore the scars of economic decline. The old textile mill stood abandoned, its broken windows like hollow eyes watching over empty streets. The grocery store had a closing soon sign taped to the door, and the only pharmacy was offering discounts it could hardly afford. David noticed families counting coins at the gas station, elderly folks struggling to carry bags because they couldn't afford delivery, and kids playing with worn-out toys in front yards that needed repairs no one could pay for. This wasn't just a town with a bad economy. It was a town filled with quiet resilience, people doing whatever they could to survive one day at a time. As he passed the diner, he overheard two waitresses talking about picking up second jobs. At the bus stop, a man in a mechanic's uniform from a competing garage was on the phone, begging for an extension on his rent. This is the reality my company is supposed to be serving, David thought, guilt creeping in. Reynolds Auto Care had once promised affordable, honest service to towns like this. But somewhere along the line, profits replaced purpose. Turning a corner, David spotted something that stopped him cold. A young mother was pushing a battered wheelchair with a small boy bundled in a jacket far too thin for the chilly air. The wheelchair squeaked with every movement, one wheel visibly bent. Still, the mother smiled down at her son, whispering something that made him giggle despite it all. David's heart sank. It wasn't just cars that needed fixing here, it was lives. And he couldn't shake the feeling that this town's struggles were about to collide with his undercover mission in ways he never expected. The next morning at Reynolds Auto Care, David was sweeping the garage floor when the faint sound of squeaking wheels caught his attention. He looked up to see the same young mother from the night before, gently guiding her son into the workshop. The boy's wheelchair wobbled badly, the front wheel nearly falling off with every turn. "Morning, folks," Mike called out from behind the counter, his usual warm grin in place. "What can we do for you today, Sarah?" David listened closely as the woman, Sarah, approached, her face a mix of hope and embarrassment. "Mike, I know this isn't exactly what you usually fix, but Tommy's wheelchair, it's gotten worse. We can't afford a replacement, and the clinic said repairs would take weeks. I was wondering if you could." Before she could finish, the front wheel gave out entirely, sending the chair tilting dangerously. David instinctively rushed over, steadying the boy, Tommy, before he could slip out. The boy, no older than 8, gave David a shy smile, unfazed by what must have been a regular occurrence. Mike walked over, crouching beside the damaged chair with a low whistle. "This thing's hanging on by a prayer." Sarah's cheeks flushed. I know. I'm sorry to bother you with this. I just didn't know where else to go. Bother me? Mike scoffed, waving her concerns away. You've got enough to worry about. Let me take a look. We'll get this sorted. David watched in quiet amazement as Mike rolled up his sleeves and got to work. No talk of cost, no mention of labor fees. Just pure, unspoken kindness. Tommy chatted with Mike as if they were old friends, telling stories about school and how he wanted to race once his chair was fixed. As David held the broken wheel in his hands, reality hit him harder than any boardroom debate ever could. This wasn't about charity, it was about human decency. And in that moment, David realized he wasn't just here to observe his employees. He was here to witness what true integrity looked like. Before Mike could gather his tools, a voice rang out from the back of the garage. I've got this, Mike. Luis wiped his hands on a rag as he approached, his coveralls stained from hours under the hood of an old pickup. His sharp eyes had already assessed the wheelchair from a distance, and there was a quiet confidence in his stride. Sarah looked uncertain. Oh, I didn't mean to pull anyone away from real work. Luis shook his head with a small smile. Ma'am, keeping this little guy moving is as real as it gets. He knelt beside Tommy, giving the boy a friendly nod. Eh, Sean, mind if I borrow your wheels for a bit? Tommy grinned and gave an enthusiastic thumbs up. David stood nearby, pretending to busy himself with inventory, but every glance was fixed on Luis. There was no hesitation, no talk of invoices or timesheets. Luis handled the battered wheelchair with the same care and focus he'd give to a luxury car, maybe even more. Looks like whoever designed this never thought about wear and tear, Luis muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Cheap parts where it matters most. Within minutes, he'd set up a workstation, salvaging bolts from old bike frames, reinforcing joints, and even adjusting the seat alignment so Tommy would sit more comfortably. Sarah watched, clearly overwhelmed. I can't pay today, but I'll figure something out next week, I promise. Luis didn't even look up. Who said anything about paying? He replied casually. This one's on me. No kid should be stuck at home because of a busted wheel. David felt a lump form in his throat. This wasn't a publicity stunt. There were no cameras, no managers watching. Luis wasn't doing this for praise. He was doing it because it was right. As Luis tightened the last bolt and spun the wheels with precision, David realized he had just seen more genuine leadership and heart in this mechanic's simple act than he'd seen in a dozen corporate boardrooms. And he knew, without a doubt, that Luis had no idea who was truly watching. What started as a quick fix soon turned into something far greater. Luis could have patched up the broken wheel in 10 minutes, but as he worked, he noticed more: worn bearings, loose bolts, a cracked frame barely holding together. The deeper he looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a wheelchair in need of repair. It was a lifeline on the verge of collapse. We're not just fixing a wheel today, Luis muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. This thing's a hazard. Mike noticed too. Stepping beside him, he glanced at the parts Luis had already laid out. Makeshift replacements from old bikes, scooters, and even a discarded office chair. You thinking what I'm thinking? Luis nodded. Yeah, if we're gonna do this, we do it right. Sarah stood nearby, holding Tommy's hand, her worry growing. Is it that bad? Luis looked up, offering a reassuring smile. It's nothing we can't handle, but I'm gonna need a bit more time to make sure Tommy's got the smoothest ride in town. David watched in awe as the entire atmosphere in the garage shifted. This wasn't just a favor anymore. Luis had taken it personally. The way he spoke, the care in his hands, it was as if he were building a custom car for a VIP client. Mike chimed in, I'll call around, see if I can scrounge up better parts. Maybe that old medical supply shop has something in the back. Even a junior mechanic wandered over, offering tools without being asked. What amazed David most wasn't just Luis's dedication, but how his quiet determination inspired the whole team to rally behind him. No one clocked out. No one asked about pay. For them, this wasn't about business. It was about a boy who deserved freedom, dignity, and the simple joy of moving through his world without fear his chair would fall apart beneath him. David felt something stir inside, a realization that this small-town garage understood the heart of service far better than any corporate slogan ever could. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the wheelchair didn't just look repaired, it looked transformed. The rusty frame gleamed with fresh paint from an old can Louise found in the back. New wheels, donated from a forgotten racing bike, spun smoothly. Every bolt was tightened, every flaw carefully reinforced. It wasn't brand new, but it was sturdy, reliable, and built with care. Luis wiped the sweat from his brow, crouching down in front of Tommy with a grin. Alahite, Sean, let's see how she rides. Tommy's eyes widened as Luis gently helped him into the seat. His small hands ran over the armrests, feeling the difference instantly. He gave an experimental push on the wheels, and for the first time in months, they responded effortlessly. The boy's face lit up with pure joy as he glided forward across the garage floor. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, tears brimming in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Luis stood up, brushing off his hands like it was nothing. No thanks needed, he said softly. Every kid deserves to move without worry. Before Sarah could insist on paying, Luis held up a hand. It's on the house. Call it shop policy for special customers. David watched the exchange, struck by how casual Luis made it seem. No grand gestures, no speeches, just a man quietly doing what was right when no one was watching. There were no cameras, no customers around to impress. If David hadn't been undercover, no one outside this garage would ever hear about what Luis had done. Sarah knelt beside her son, tears streaming freely now. You don't understand. This means everything. Luis simply smiled and gave Tommy a playful salute. You just make sure to race safely, buddy. As Sarah and Tommy left, Tommy rolling smoothly beside his mother, David felt the weight of what he'd witnessed. It was in that quiet moment, as Luis returned to cleaning his tools without fanfare, that David realized true character wasn't built in boardrooms or measured in profits. It was revealed in moments like this, when kindness expected nothing in return. The next morning, David showed up early, eager to understand more about the man who had quietly changed a boy's life without asking for a dime. Luis was already at work, sleeves rolled up, covered in grease as he tuned up an old pickup. During a break, David casually approached him, pretending to wipe down a tool. You didn't have to fix that wheelchair, you know, he said, testing the waters. Most people wouldn't have. Luis shrugged, not looking for praise. Yeah, well, most people don't know what it's like to need something and not have anyone to turn to. David glanced at him, sensing a deeper story beneath those words. You've been there. Luis leaned against the workbench, a distant look in his eyes. Grew up around here. My dad was a mechanic too. Taught me everything I know. But when he got sick, we couldn't afford much. I remember pushing my little sister's wheelchair for miles because we couldn't fix the broken wheels. People walked right past us like we didn't exist. David listened silently, the puzzle pieces falling into place. After my dad passed, I kept the shop going, Luis continued. It barely makes ends meet, but when I see someone struggling, especially a kid, I remember my sister. I promised myself if I ever had the skills to help, I would. No one should feel that helpless. David felt a lump in his throat. This wasn't charity for Luis. It was personal, a vow born from hardship, honored every day without recognition. Your sister? David asked gently. Luis offered a small, bittersweet smile. She passed a few years back, but every time I fix something for someone who can't afford it, it feels like I'm keeping that promise to her. David nodded, deeply moved. This was more than a mechanic doing a good deed. Luis was living by a code of quiet integrity, shaped by pain and resilience. As Luis returned to work, David knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a good employee. This was the kind of man who could inspire a company to rediscover its heart. As the days passed, David couldn't ignore the growing contrast between Luis's dedication and the company's failing leadership. While Luis poured his heart into every repair, paid or unpaid, the regional manager, Curtis, finally decided to make one of his rare visits to the garage. Curtis arrived in a spotless suit, his expensive watch gleaming as he glanced around with thinly veiled disdain. "This place looks like it hasn't seen a proper upgrade in years," he muttered, stepping carefully to avoid a small oil stain, as if afraid to dirty his polished shoes. David watched from the sidelines, still in his disguise, as Curtis called for a brief team meeting. The staff, only 4 mechanics now due to budget cuts, gathered reluctantly. "Listen up," Curtis began, flipping through a clipboard without making eye contact. "Head office wants higher numbers. No more freebies. No more helping out customers who can't pay. We're running a business, not a charity." Luis's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "And another thing," Curtis continued, eyeing the aging equipment. "If something breaks down, don't expect replacements anytime soon. Budget's tight. Make do or close shop. Simple as that." David felt anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. The garage was barely surviving because corporate had stripped it of resources, yet here was management blaming the workers for falling profits. Not once did Curtis ask how things were going or what the team needed to succeed. As Curtis strutted back to his car, Luis quietly returned to a half-finished brake job, his expression unreadable. David could see the weight on his shoulders, the frustration of being told to turn away people like the boy with the broken wheelchair, all while management looked down on them from their ivory towers. For David, this moment confirmed everything he feared. The company had lost its soul at the top. But standing in that garage, watching Luis refuse to let corporate greed change who he was, David realized something else. It wasn't too late to turn things around, if he acted fast. David knew the time for observing was over. He had seen enough: the dedication of Luis, the neglect from management, and the heart of a company buried under corporate indifference. But one moment sealed his decision to reveal who he truly was. It was late afternoon when a familiar face rolled into the garage. Tommy, the young boy with the wheelchair Luis had repaired days earlier. His mother followed, holding a small box wrapped in simple paper. "Hi, Mr. Luis," Tommy said, his voice bright despite the awkward movements of his hands. We brought you something." Luis wiped his greasy hands on a rag and smiled warmly. "Hey, buddy, how's the chair holding up?" "Better than ever." Tommy beamed. His mother stepped forward, her eyes glassy with emotion. "It's not much," she said softly, offering the box. "Just some homemade cookies. We wanted to say thank you again. We couldn't afford what you did for us, but you did it anyway." Luis hesitated, then accepted the box with a humble nod. "You didn't have to do that. I was just helping out." As Tommy and his mother left, David felt a lump in his throat. Luis hadn't done it for praise or reward, just because it was the right thing to do. That quiet act of kindness, unnoticed by the world, was worth more than any profit margin. David glanced around the garage, the peeling paint, the worn-out tools, the exhausted team still pushing through. He couldn't stay silent any longer. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the garage doors, David approached Luis, his heart pounding. "Luis," he began, pulling off his cap and fake glasses, "there's something I need to tell you." Luis looked up, confused as David straightened his posture, shedding the disguise completely. "My name isn't Dave. I'm David Langston, CEO of Langston Auto Care." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Luis blinked, the weight of realization slowly settling in. David took a deep breath. "And I've been here to see the truth with my own eyes." The next morning, the atmosphere at the garage was anything but normal. Word had spread fast. David Langston, the CEO himself, was returning. But this time, there was no disguise, no cover story. He was coming back as the man in charge. Luis stood by his workstation, still processing the revelation from the day before. The other mechanics exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what this visit would bring. Some feared layoffs, others expected a lecture. No one imagined that the quiet, humble Dave, who had worked beside them, was actually the owner of the entire company. At exactly 9 a.m., a sleek black car pulled up outside the garage, a stark contrast to the battered vehicles usually parked there. David Langston stepped out, no longer in oil-stained overalls, but in a sharp suit, though he deliberately left the tie behind. He didn't want to look like just another corporate executive. As he walked into the garage, conversations died down. Tools were set aside. All eyes were on him. David raised a hand, offering a calm smile. "Morning, everyone. I know this is unexpected." Luis nodded respectfully, but his usual easy demeanor was replaced by uncertainty. David continued, his voice steady but sincere. "I didn't come here today to talk about profits or performance metrics. I came here because I saw something more important than numbers. I saw heart. I saw what this company was supposed to stand for, thanks to people like Luis." The team glanced at Luis, who shifted uncomfortably under the attention. David stepped closer to him. "Luis, you reminded me why I started Langston Auto Care in the first place. Not just to fix cars, but to serve communities, to help people when they need it most." He looked around at the rest of the staff. "That spirit has been missing, and it's my fault for letting management forget it. But that changes today." There was a pause, tension hanging thick in the air. "I'm here to make things right, starting with all of you." As David finished his speech, Luis felt a knot tightening in his stomach. The praise sounded good, almost too good, but experience had taught him that when corporate starts calling you by name, it usually isn't a reward. It's a warning. When David asked Luis to step into the office for a private conversation, the worst-case scenarios flooded his mind. Maybe I broke some policy by fixing that wheelchair, Luis thought. Maybe they saw it as stealing company time or using parts without authorization. His heart pounded as he followed David through the garage, every step heavier than the last. The office door closed behind them, and Luis stood awkwardly, wiping his hands on his work pants, still stained with grease from the morning's repairs. David sat down, but didn't gesture for Luis to do the same. That only made Luis more nervous. He braced himself, waiting for the words, "We appreciate your service," but the kind of corporate talk that usually ended with a pink slip. "Luis," David began, his tone serious now, "I want to talk about what you did 2 days ago." Luis swallowed hard. "Look, Mr. Langston, I know I probably wasn't supposed to use company parts for that wheelchair. I couldn't watch that kid struggle. I wasn't looking for trouble, I swear." David raised his hand to stop him, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You think I brought you in here to fire you?" Luis hesitated, then nodded. "I've seen how these things go." David leaned forward, his expression softening. "Luis, you didn't break any rules that matter. You honored the rule that counts most, doing the right thing." Luis blinked, confused. "So, I'm not in trouble." David let out a quiet laugh. Far from it. For the first time since stepping into the office, Luis allowed himself to breathe. But he still had no idea just how much his life was about to change. Luis stood frozen, still trying to process that he wasn't about to be fired. But David wasn't done. "Sit down, Luis," David said warmly, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I have something important to tell you." Cautiously, Luis lowered himself into the seat, his calloused hands gripping his knees. He watched as David reached into a folder on the desk and pulled out a set of documents, along with a small velvet box. "For years, this company has needed people like you. People who care about more than just the job. People who care about others," David began. "You reminded me what this business should stand for." Luis shifted uncomfortably and used such direct praise. "I was just helping a kid who needed it. And that's exactly why you deserve this," David replied, sliding the documents across the table. Luis glanced down, his brow furrowing as he read the first page. His eyes widened in disbelief. It was a deed to a house. His name was on it. I don't understand," Luis stammered. David smiled. "You mentioned working extra shifts to afford a better place for your family. Well, now you don't have to worry about that anymore. The house is yours, fully paid." Luis's mouth opened, but no words came out. His mind raced, thinking of his wife, his kids, the cramped apartment they'd been stuck in for years. "And there's more," David continued, opening the velvet box to reveal a set of keys. "Starting next week, you're the new regional operations manager. A company car comes with the role, along with a significant salary increase." Luis stared at the keys, his vision blurring as tears welled up. No one had ever handed him anything in life. He'd fought for every scrap. Now, Because of a simple act of kindness, his entire world was shifting. I don't know what to say, Luis whispered, his voice cracking. Just keep being the man you were when no one was watching, David said, standing to shake his hand. That's all I ask. Luis wasn't the only one whose life changed after that day. David Langston had come to the garage expecting to find problems on the ground level. But instead, he found inspiration, and he knew it wasn't enough to just reward one good man. The whole company needed to reflect the values Luis had shown. Within weeks, David launched a company-wide initiative called Hearts in Action, a program encouraging employees to take time for community service, small acts of kindness, and support for customers beyond transactions. What Luis had done, helping that boy without expecting anything in return, became the core example in every training manual and company meeting. Posters went up in every garage and office, featuring a simple message: do what's right, even when no one's watching. Below it was a photo, not of Luis holding a trophy or receiving an award, but of him kneeling beside the boy's wheelchair, smiling humbly as he tightened the last bolt. David also cleaned house at the management level. Regional managers who had ignored employee struggles or prioritized profit over people were quietly replaced. In their place, leaders like Luis, who understood integrity, hard work, and compassion, were promoted. Employee morale skyrocketed. Where once the garages had been filled with workers just getting through the day, now there was pride in wearing the company logo again. Stories began to emerge from across the country. Mechanics helping stranded families, technicians volunteering after hours, teams organizing charity drives. David visited locations personally, not as a CEO in a suit, but often in plain clothes, walking the floors and talking to employees. Every time he saw a small act of kindness, he remembered why he started this journey. As for Luis, he embraced his new role, not just managing operations, but mentoring others. He became the face of the company's transformation, always reminding his team, we don't just fix machines, we help people. And slowly but surely, the company that had been on the brink of losing its soul found a new identity, one built on the quiet power of doing the right thing. Months after that fateful day, Luis stood outside the garage, not as a struggling mechanic, but as the regional manager of a company reborn. Yet, despite the new title and responsibilities, he remained the same humble man who once knelt beside a broken wheelchair simply because it was the right thing to do. The story of Luis's quiet act of kindness had spread far beyond the company walls. It was featured in local news, shared across social media, and even mentioned at business conferences as a reminder that true leadership and change often start with simple human decency. One afternoon, a familiar sound caught Luis's ear, the soft whirring of wheels. He turned to see little Benji racing toward him in his fully restored wheelchair, now customized with better support and even a sleek paint job in his favorite color. His mother followed, smiling gratefully as always. "Mr. Luis, look how fast I can go now." Benji beamed, doing a playful spin. Luis chuckled, kneeling to give the boy a high five. "I see you're putting those upgrades to good use." For Luis, moments like this were worth more than any promotion or paycheck. It was a reminder of why he'd chosen to help that day without hesitation. It was never about recognition. It was about making life a little easier for someone who needed it. Inside the office, a plaque hung on the wall, a gift from David Langston. It read, "One act of kindness can transform a company, a community, and a future." As Luis watched Benji roll off with his mother, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His story had sparked more than corporate change. It had ignited a culture where compassion was valued as much as skill. The legacy Luis created wasn't written in contracts or policies. It lived in every employee who chose to help without being asked, in every customer who left with more than just a repaired vehicle. It was the legacy of kindness, and it would endure far beyond him. The end.